I was just listening to my own audiobook and trying to find a way to finish this book that I'm working on without losing my mind. I feel like I'm going insane and everything is driving me nuts. I'm overstimulated. I feel like I have every disorder in the world combined into one vessel that is my brain, and I can't think and I can't do anything, and God hates me. And that's just what I would say if you were to ask, and no one asked me, but okay. All right. So anyway, what have I done? Right? Am I right? Am I right, folks? Am I right? Okay. Um, I'm writing chapter, what are we on? Chapter 35 of the long-awaited accolades. And I know everyone's like, but the name accolades, it sucks, right? Like, accolades, it doesn't roll off the tongue, it doesn't flow. Boo. And it's like, okay, man, just chill out for a second and think about it, you know? Chapter 35 of Accolades. You might find it interesting. We're kind of caught up to where I'm at. I'm happy with it. Damn, I've been writing for a minute. Hold up. Okay, Alyssa Carter had sat at Gilroy alone under the oak tree, thinking longer than she normally would. Not really about anything in particular, but about the professor, the flight to Rome, Andrew, and about what she had heard on the radio at the end of analysis. The idea that the professor knew about this phenomena worried her spirit. She hadn't really slept in months, really. She spent her days calling the professor and her nights awake thinking, listening to the birds, the static, and the sound of herself going insane. Alyssa had spent the entirety of her 4 years at Gilroy University planning her life, prepping for something next, and suddenly the analysis of critical literature threw a curveball that destroyed her. The morning she had sat under the oak tree with Andrew Hill, everything was okay, but when the professor had questioned her about Pompeii, she began to think. And I don't think Alyssa had stopped thinking since, so she sat under the oak tree alone wherever Andrew was. She didn't care much at the moment. She, like Hannah, had her invisible books and cried her invisible tears, and I'm sure that Andrew was somewhere with the Franklins at a gala or a benefit dinner or a banquet somewhere in Clifford, Brazil, Israel, or the Philippines, perhaps India, Sweden, or the Maldives, or some dream world where Alyssa Carter couldn't find him. And while she was reminiscing under the oak tree, her mind was thinking only about the fact that she had returned from Rome. The professor and Andrew had not been there to return with her. And Hannah was off questioning the authority of Dean Calmares and Terence Franklin. So, what choice did Alyssa have to think about Andrew and the professor and not the students of analysis, but just the two morons, really, that had destroyed her life? Why the professor had questioned the authenticity of the photograph of Pompeii in the first place, and why he had chosen to abandon the project rather than to follow through with her ambition. Surely the professor's invite to Rome, Italy was enough for Alyssa Carter to bring Hannah Teller to a close, right? But alas, Hannah, like everyone else in the library on campus and seemingly in the world, had disappeared, and the last person she wanted to hear from was Andrew. The professor, however, was wealthy enough to call her from the television set, was still enough of an airhead to forget his own motivations along the way, and perhaps he should reread his own syllabus instead of attending the Franklin benefit galas. Well, wherever the professor is, which somehow not even Chris Kallmeyers knows at this present moment, we know where he is not headed next. In fact, Kallmeyers had let Hannah know that his plan to host the benefit gala in Gilroy in only 3 months, but to Alyssa Carter, who had freshly returned from Rome, it wasn't an option to attend the gala to find the professor because the entirety of the faculty and analysis would be there, including Andrew and the Franklins, whom she didn't want to see at all. So Alyssa thought for a moment the professor might invite her personally, thank her for her help with his trip to Rome, perhaps say anything at all, but he had left her and her heart in the Hotel Angeles, which did not exist. And Hannah had sent the professor a DM all throughout Rome, and only on occasion did anyone think to reach out to Alyssa Carter besides herself and the curious notes she took in her diary to keep her head on straight, but at this point it was actually honestly useless, and it seemed as though everyone decided to just live in her brain and leave her out of it. Against her will, of course, because who really would decide that as a human being that was a good idea? So she sat with her thoughts of Alyssa Carter, Hannah Teller, Dave Da Vinci, Karl Myers, and the Franklins. Unfortunately, she had a moment to have a genuine idea. Of course, the radio professor, hot on her tail, would be there to comfort her, I'm sure, unreliable as always. But Alyssa Carter did have an idea, besides trying to get the professor to have his own ideas for once. Really, it was out of desperation and running out of time that she had the idea to attend the benefit gala after all. But it was an idea in 3 months. In 3 months, and not only would she be graduating, but I think Hannah wanted her dead anyway, and I don't think she would survive. Not that she had much ambition after such travels. Alyssa could only go if she Alyssa could, if she wanted to, go to San Francisco today, play a symphony, come home, and be done with it all. But she wanted Andrew Hill to just admit that he was wrong for leaving her behind and kind of dumb for taking so long to say anything at all. Honestly, it was like a dummy that just moved in the night, which terrified Alyssa Carter, who never felt more alone, betrayed, I suppose. And his pride was too far grown for his ego to ever catch up to Alyssa's emotionless state of being, so the sacrifice is going to be for her love, for his ego, and for her soul, for his success. And all the while, her peers are as useless as they've ever been. So who could she run to, turn to, need when everyone else does not think like they've never thought before? But their eyes watched her every move, motivated Andrew and the professor to dance in the night where Alyssa wasn't looking, a turn of the knife. And for Andrew to confess, really, that he does love her and doesn't know it. It would take the might of 1,000 suns and the death of an ego, I'm sure. It's Alyssa's, but perhaps Andrew or the professor might post something on Instagram just for Alyssa Carter's love. But what the hell was she going to do with a post on Instagram? It's not like the professor could just call her. He doesn't have her number or address or the audacity to reach out. And the gala is too far away for him to use his brain, so she could meet him not the year before, not in 2022 when she first had tickets to go see him, not in 2019 when she first met him, and not in a month when the stupid benefit gala hosted by the Franklins was supposed to be the death of her. But I'm sure no one thought of this. So leave it to Alyssa Carter to solve the problem on her own, alongside the other psychological confusions she had to deal with, mostly the weight of her peers, which was exhausting, heavy, brutal, and crushing her back into a pulp. And talking to Andrew Hill was like talking to grass growing, boring, useless, and repetitive, and anything she said he ignored, anything she tried he reversed, anything she suggested he ate. So fuck Alyssa Carter and was the only option. So she sat there under the oak tree, thinking longer than she wanted to, dreaming further than she could grasp onto, losing her gravity, her mind, her body, her soul, her freedom, piece by piece, like a child escaping like a child escaping a storm through torchlight at dinner by table. Blah, 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 blah. Annoyed mostly because of the things, like a child escaping a storm through torchlight at night at a dinner table, afraid. Annoyed mostly because of the things that would jump out at her. They don't know what else to do but bother and scare Alyssa Carter in her face. She slept with one eye open for her safety, but for the entertainment of her peers, everyone else. Andrew Hill slept with both eyes closed on a comforter made up of all the bodies that had carried him through the night, lifted him up in the day, and caught him when he decided to jump off a rug, but dropped Alyssa Carter when she fell, and she was like Hannah, still falling, and Alyssa and Andrew Hill is incredibly dumb. So today, she sat under this oak tree, writing, thinking, praying to Andrew just for to think for once about his own story. The time alone that he had begged for Alyssa Carter was more of just a mirage in the desert. He did not know her at all. And Carter, who begged for the time alone only after she had learned it was even a thing, had lost all of herself and the time and the idea anyway. And she had only herself to keep her company, but the eyes of everyone else to move her. And who had moved them into her space? Andrew, because he wasn't thinking. Published content that was about Alyssa Carter without Alyssa Carter, and the world spent years thinking about her, creating an image of her, surrounding her body and her mind until it was their idea of her. And if everyone in the world had an idea of who Alyssa Carter is except Alyssa Carter, she would probably be too many people to be one person, and would cease to exist. And in that way, she would die with the world as the killer, with the blood on their hands. And of course, when they check on this blood, it'll be Alyssa Carter's they find wine and the smell and touch and taste on the hands of Andrew, who digs too far into her space to be comforting and reassuring. For Alyssa Carter, that was like starting over. And for Andrew, this was starting something new, like a towel he can use, and if he chooses, throw it away. And months, 3 months, have passed, and no longer does he recognize Alyssa Carter's face, or body, or soul, or name, or spirit, and he would slowly have to forget her until she is someone new for him. Like a leap of faith, she jumped into the unknown oblivion where danger lied, and she was the target of a gun pointed at her for life. And she blindly walked into the dark, hoping that the trigger or the finger on the trigger wasn't going to pull it. And when Andrew dies and she loves him, tragedy befalls Alyssa Carter once again. When the world accuses her of theft, and she must wait once again until her love returns. So as Alyssa Carter waits for now, for Andrew to find a way to undo some of his own decisions. That's as far as I've gotten. Um, do you know what time it is here at 9:40? Hi. What are you talking about? I'm writing a book. Um, I'm writing a book called Accolades, and it's 35 chapters long. Hi again. Um, it's 35 chapters long. It's about these this professor and this girl and a whole bunch of stuff that just happens in between. Um, it's about AI. It's about traveling. It's about voices and people. And I mean, it's 35 chapters long. And I'll read you this one chapter that I just enjoy. The Franklins are big money rich, like legal team for their legal team. But Terrence is a professor of computer science at the University of San Diego, except dude is never there. It's just a cover for all the money, and the whole university sham. What do you mean sham? Terrence does all the FAFSA shit. It's how Andrew gets his tuition, so it's government money, not the Franklins. What the fuck? Terrence works at the university, so FAFSA pays for the students' tuitions, like Andrew, which pays for the Terrence C. Franklin. Oh my god, what the hell? Yeah, right, but it gets worse. Have you ever seen the banquet clip? What banquet clip, Angie? Oh my God, the banquet clip! Did you hear what Terrence said? No, I was too busy looking at Dean Chalmers dropping his fucking knife in the middle of the auditorium. Yeah, 1306, right? No, it wasn't on Facebook Reels or whatever. Oh my God, Anaya, please keep up. What? Terrence stops his speech right when Chalmers drops his stupid fork knife. But look at this timing of the photo from Alyssa. 1306? Oh shit. Yeah, what the fuck? What does that mean? Anaya, oh my fucking god. What? You think that's a coincidence? Look at them. Wait, holy shit. Commerce totally fucking knew they heard Terrence. Yeah, but the cameras, aka the fucking reporters, saw Commerce knock that shit over. So what? So it's the exact moment Alyssa posted the photo. She fucking heard them in Rome. No way. This clip is hella old. Why would she even post the photo anyway? It's not like it has anything to do with Commerce. I don't know, but shit is weird. Chapter 31. Hannah Beth Teller, librarian and fond admirer of Professor David da Vinci, had received a series of notes from the professor. 9 flowers, the coin, messages, but she hadn't thought much of them until the professor left for Rome. Italy was fond in her memories, but she didn't about his Pompey charade. She knew that reporters would be all over it and didn't care much for them snooping around her business, but Chalmers and Franklin had freaked her out. Terrence showing up out of the blue was mad freaky, but at the exact moment that Hannah was in Chalmers' office, it clicked to Hannah that she wasn't there by accident. Chalmers had led her to the office for Terrence C. Franklin. The Tesla key was weird, but why would she need access to his car? Hannah despised the shit that Terrence said about the homeless students and thought there was no way a housing sector would be open after the new building. Not the way that he talked about them. She buried Alyssa Carter to keep Chalmers away from her. And but Andrew and Chris should have known she'd be in trouble. It's not like they were poor, but Alyssa is smart and fond of the professor, so asking questions about Pompey could be dangerous. When they disappeared, it made sense Hannah would keep a secret, but Chalmers and Franklin showing up together scared the daylights out of her. In fact, when she checked her desk at 9 in library, Chris was sending her updates by the minute. Hannah would check behind her in case the dean or worse, Franklin himself decided to show up, but Chris was reassuring, so she kept digging. The new building being named after the library was mad freaky, especially since Terrence was asking questions. But why name the new admin building after ancient histories if, of course, no one asked the librarian about ancient history section 285 before beginning the project? They just kind of did it, like they always do. She was surprised Chalmers even let her keep her position in the Great Hall if it was such a big expense, but Hannah taught the analysis of critical literature. She knew about Pompeii from visiting Rome, and where she had read all about it in Artinary and Hart's book. The photograph was damning because of its era, but her name being on the back didn't make any sense. Hannah couldn't figure it out, so she left for the next professor. She left it for the next professor, David da Vinci, who might have had a clue how the hell it was on the back. The book banning was the perfect time to get rid of it from public access before anyone could read it in Hannah's name and find Hannah's name. If the students saw the note, they would start asking bigger questions. And what's worse, Hannah thought, she'd encourage the kids to read, to learn and grow. But Artsinary and Hurst don't know shit about Hannah Teller, and Beth isn't even her legal name. So how the hell and why the hell they wrote it down was scary shit. Hannah left the book for Chris da Vinci to find in the analysis class for the next semester, but she had no way of knowing if he'd actually read it. Somehow, her name being in the book meant she was on the right track, and if there was really something to it, Hannah would find a way. She wasn't surprised Chris started playing her game, leaving her notes, codes, in the goose chase, but Pompeii was a whole nother deal. Way before their time, out of their subject, they had no reason to cross paths with the photograph of ancient Rome. Besides, cameras like that required a system much stronger than anything ancient Romans had access to. A Canon T5i can't exist before Artsinary and Hurst time, so how could they find the image? It looked like AI. Like some computer just plugged in some numbers and out came a picture of Pompeii. But it was worse than that. Artsinary was old, like he survived the war, his time was coming to an end. Everyone knows that's inevitable, but he's a great writer, so Battle Cries was more than just a memoir. It was his chance to tell the truth. To do that, Artsinary would need to find someone that he could trust, not a spy or someone that could tell the whole scheme to the world. But he thought about it. And what if that's exactly what he needed? So Artsinary set off to find someone who could read, or better yet, that had actually read Battle Cries, his memoir, when he came across the Pulitzer Prize winner Carol Hurst. Carol had reached out to him actually after reading Battle Cries in her book club. She sent him an email and Artsinary explained his plan, so she was in to help him. Hurst and Artsinary wrote Pompeii and Ancient Rome, a tribute to ancient histories, exactly 285 pages in length and a complete work of nonfiction. By the end, Hurst and Artillery were great friends and she adored his mission, but the book was missing something. Battle Cries was a memoir. It already had told the truth Artillery wanted to share, so why would he ask Carol Hurst to join him in writing a new book? It bugged her for years before it was published, until she was teaching a class at Gilroy University. A young professor named Christopher David da Vinci arrived in her classroom, tall, handsome, and overly excited to shake her hand. Da Vinci, he said, nice to meet you. Carol was pleased the professor would be taking over the analysis of critical literature for her, but his name shook her. Da Vinci, she asked. Yeah. I don't know, a big fan of the Romans, I guess. You know, it's funny, Christopher. I actually just finished a book you might like. Chapter 32. Artsinary and Carol have had sat on the book for almost a decade before it was released. Small changes couldn't add up to the name, and Artsinary was getting older. She was furious the work wasn't finished. What was missing? The young professor had an uncommon name, Da Vinci, but it fit so perfectly with Pompeii and ancient Rome, right before Artsinary had passed. He asked Carol if she could help him with one last thing. The pre-release signing meant Carol and Artsinary could meet with the readers and get their opinion on it before it released. They didn't think the book would get anywhere, and certainly not the New York Times bestseller if it didn't resonate with their fans. Battle Cries wasn't famous, so Artsinary waited alone with Carol in case any lone readers had questions. A boy named Andrew Franklin approached with the copy almost 50 pages in and asked for an autograph, but Artsinary looked at him like he knew him. Can you keep a secret? He asked. There are none, Andrew replied, and that was enough for Artsinary to sign the book and send him on his way. He turned to Carol, who was puzzled. How strange, that boy. He looks like a Franklin. He asked me to sign it, Andrew Hill. Chapter 33. Pompeii in ancient Rome was about as popular as you might expect it to be. Surely you, the reader, wouldn't be all that interested in it if it hadn't been for this book. I decided whether or not Alyssa Carter should be read from the reader's perspective, but in a sense, the authors were seeking justice and not a work of pure fiction, as lies, like you might expect. Hearst and Artenary published the book without accepting defeat, and Artenary slowly began his recovery. It was difficult, but he was the author and had a point to prove. His German background outcasted him most other American authors, but Hearst was a great friend who showed him kindness he couldn't have survived without. Her love changed everything for him and opened doors most people tried to keep shut. The Franklins aren't great people with big money and a lot of power, but the joke is the accolades. No one was going to recap the whole truth, the whole story, the whole movie without some sort of benefit, and neither Carol nor Artenary needed the money or the fame, but the readers, you needed something bigger. You needed to feel like Andrew Franklin or Chris Collier, so the accolades was born to give the reader a chance to tell the story. It's a true story, Artenary and the accolades, based off your life, my life, and everyone that comes before us, and of course, like any good reader knows, everything that comes after. Of course, the radio transmission will pick up on the title because everyone knows about the accolades' success. And you know, like I do, anything is possible. Franklin could go on to denounce FAFSA or even take credit for the book, but the one thing he can't do is write it. And no amount of fiction could ever change that. It's a shame that the Franklins think they can get away with this, but everything they've ever said exists somewhere, including the lies, the harassment, the fraud. Terrence should be in jail, or worse than jail, Terrence should be dead. It's not just his language, the way he swears, the videos of him on the internet. It's not just the whole family that wouldn't stop at anything, nothing to have power. They will lie and censor themselves, but the truth is inevitable, and Artenary wouldn't have to write the book if Franklin's or the readers, told the truth. But we only feel the need to keep going whenever we have a story to tell. The Franklins don't. Their story is our story, and their strength is our strength. Man only exists as man, and no amount of power can change that. The Franklins' new building only exists to make them more money. Of course, it doesn't. It only makes the headlines in the press. And Alyssa Carter loves Andrew Hill, not Anthony Franklin. Nothing can change that. Her story is meant to collide like a sign that we finally learn the truth. The music, the memories, the voice of reason, God. As for the Franklins, hell's door waits for them as we speak because it speaks over the voice of reason. And if you can't stop, the magnitude of gravity will crack them until their heart stops beating. Of course, we know the real angels don't need a heartbeat to survive, but it'd be nice though. Chapter 34. To Alyssa Carter's utter surprise, Professor David Da Vinci had more depth to his conspicuous lectures than she had initially thought. Of course, his eccentricism was odd, and the subject was strange for an analysis class, but the discovery he was making shocked her more than anything else. Da Vinci knew Pompeii was spacious enough for students to be curious, and historic enough to have significance, but mysterious enough to ask questions. Thus, when the sudden radio interference, a note from Arsenary and Hurst was discovered with Hannah Beth Teller's name in it, Alyssa Carter knew there was more to the story than she had initially hoped. Looking back at the book signing at Comic-Con, Alyssa realized Carol Hurst was somehow connected to this ancient mystery. Artenary, as articulated by Andrew, had a way of writing about his life in a way that felt like you could be a part of it, and in many ways you were. Artenary's first memoir, Battle Cries, recapped the post-war life he survived. Naturally, any naturally any child of this world has questions about what is going on here. To some, we learn to push them aside, look past them, or bury them in our deep subconscious. And to me, it is all I have. And the Artenaries fought for a better world, against whom, though, I wondered. My father and my father's father were not dictators of a first world country, and yet the consequences fell onto their shoulders. How could I summarize their life without them around? The same for life post-war, the same for life during the war, and I would wonder if things would ever change. But the more I asked, the less I found. It was all about what I could give, all the while it was what I received. But things ultimately changed, and I always felt like I was deep in it, surrounded even not by the tidal waves, but by the cause and effects themselves. Artinary's life post-war would naturally raise questions about how life was possible in the way that it was, so it didn't surprise Alyssa or Andrew that he'd investigate further. Artinary's expressed freedom, Carol wrote with a passion, and together they formed a perfect solution like chemists seeking to resolve a dilution. Hannah, though she was now aware of their messages for her, still couldn't solve the why. Surely they wanted the solution, but what could that mean? What actions do they really have to take? Exhaust is inevitable in this process, but why do we feel exhaust? Where does the pressure come from? Overworking yourself will strip all the good from nutrients from you, but to find answers, we spend time digging through the mud. Metaphorically and literally, there is a way. There is always a way. Such is the way of a loop. The life cycle does not loop in the way a video would on the internet, but our neurotransmitters absolutely fire signals that feel repetitive. Though in nature no two things are the same, and even when it feels like we are experiencing the same day over and over, and the same pain and the same ache, it's always a different sensation or matter, and thus we can learn until a threshold is surpassed. In that way, we write, and we take notes, and we create checkpoints, so not as to create a loop, but as to navigate and surpass expectations, and then what? Artillery was kind and thoughtful, but only to the depths of getting answers for questions that hadn't been asked yet, not by the right person at least. Okay, chapter 20. Terence C. Franklin and Dean Christopher Chalmers in the same room was Terence C. Franklin and Dean Christopher Chalmers in the same room together is like watching two shooting stars parallel to each other. For Hannah Teller, this phenomenon humbled her, almost curtsied. She felt her head bow a little. Terence went on to say, which is absurd to Chris Chalmers, I'm sure heard we love your work in the library, which Hannah interpreted as, I know you're extremely stressed and the beautiful work that you do on our campus. Library is a humble reflection of your heart strength and religious morals. All that to say, I know, as I'm speaking to you right now, you can't help but worry about the homeless students on campus and wildlife who use our support, squirrels, birds, and other shit, I'm sure. But fuck it, a skunk and a dolphin. But you're very beautiful, and I'm sure, but you're very beautiful, and I'm really glad to see you here. It's a surprise, and I'm sure. But I'm here for Chris Colmeyer, so please step aside. Hannah knows Terence C. Franklin said none of that out loud, but I'm sure you heard we love your work in the library. It's truly enough for Hannah Teller, the librarian, to step a whole several feet aside to the side. So Terence C. Franklin had a direct line of sight to Chris Colmeyer. It's like watching butterflies mate at that point. It's beautiful, as beautiful as it is to see C. Franklin and Dean Colmers in the same room together. Hannah decided to leave. She grabbed her invisible books and opened the door without dropping them and closed it behind her. She tiptoed down the stairs before checking her phone. D. Vinci when in Rome. She rolled her eyes. Chapter 21. She regretted rolling her eyes at this point. Terence couldn't possibly be there to talk about the $1 million renovation, and I don't mean to say renovation, I mean to say new building built on campus because all the celebrations were over at this point. By the time Chris Kallmeyer settled into a new desk and a new office and a new building, the accolades were over. And Hannah continued down the stairs, ignoring David Da Vinci and trying not to think about the beauty of Chris Kallmeyer's and Terence Franklin, who followed her down the steps. It really is a pleasure, Franklin said. Hannah paused. Respectfully, sir, thank you. You already said that. She thought about continuing, but paused. Karl Myers and I have no business together, and I need you to know that what you think about the new building that I built. And I don't need you to know that you think we should spend wow, and I don't need to know what you think we should spend our money on next. Do you have any ideas? Hannah rolled her eyes. You already mentioned the homelessness. And Franklin, like the psychopath that he is, said, so what, a new dormitory, a new underground bunker, fuck a new camp. Hannah lifted her foot to start walking again. Okay, done, done. A new, fuck it. What's it called? A new housing sector? Is that good? Hannah wanted to say yes, actually, Terrence. Franklin, a new cheap free housing department for students is good, and he approved it. For the next several years, Hannah hoped that she would not see, nor think, nor speak, nor collide with C. Franklin ever. Not in her brain, not in her car, not on campus, not if she was sleeping with him in his bed, in his house, with his money. Never. But he stood there, and she rolled her eyes again. C. Franklin leaned over, pulled out a set of Tesla keys, and Hannah thought he was going to kiss her. But she realized the joke is Tesla cars don't need a key to start up, and he was carrying them around purely to show off that he wanted to jump off a bridge on a concrete dam and kill himself. Hannah looked at the keys again, and he handed them to her, and it was just one key, but really it was for his Tesla. Chapter 22. By the time Hannah was home, in her bed, ignoring David Da Vinci, the thought of the Tesla was dead and buried under a rug to her. Other things she buried: Chris Kallmeyers, Da Vinci, Alyssa Carter, Andrew Hill, who she then dug up immediately like it never happened, and Franklin in his comment on whatever the fuck you call homeless student housing. Each had their reason for being dead and buried under Hannah's rug, but Alyssa Carter would understand why she was under there. It makes sense, Hannah. She almost thought of 13 reasons why. I'd bury me under there too. Alyssa Carter was sweet, and Hannah almost felt like she almost felt bad that she killed and buried her under her rug, but she let her continue. Alyssa Carter, dead and buried. Murdered, actually. Killed by Hannah Teller, a small town librarian. She laughed. Alyssa Carter's obituary? Dead and buried. I live under a rug now. She was laughing at this point. Hannah stopped her and said, Alyssa, you're sick, making sure she was hiding the Tesla key. But you're a good friend. If I buried me, Hannah, I'd kill me and put myself under your rug too. And that's in the ideal situation. Really, I should be thanking you if I haven't already. It's no problem, Melissa. Hannah didn't feel bad. I don't even think I don't even miss being alive. Alyssa Carter said, fuck all of this. It almost sounded out of character for Alyssa Carter to be so morbid. I don't know how else to put it, but if Hannah had to live under the roof of Chris Kallmeyers and Steve Franklin, she'd rather kill Alyssa Carter and bury her under her rug than she would let her find out about the shit Franklin said earlier. Even the Trump family knows this shit was the right decision. Shit, if Donald Trump found Alyssa Carter right then and there, or Hannah for that reason, Hannah would kill herself and Alyssa Carter again. At this point, Hannah turned her phone all the way off and sold her soul to somewhere safe before deciding to call Alyssa Carter. Chapter 23. Hello. Alyssa answered. Alyssa asked. Maybe she answered. Andrew was beside her, and you could hear him in the background smiling. Can I ask you something? Hannah asked. That can't be good. She was right. Honestly, it was just good to hear from Melissa Carter. No one was wondering where David Da Vinci was, and any question Hannah Teller had for Alyssa Carter was about to be a problem for a few reasons. The first, Hannah had asked more questions than she had asked. Hannah had more answers than she had questions. For any question she was about to ask Alyssa Carter, she already had answers for anyway. At this point, Hannah realized she didn't have any questions for Alyssa Carter and hung up the phone. Alyssa Carter returned back to what she was doing, which was not Andrew Hill right then and there, though the way Andrew was looking at her, she almost wished it was him she was doing. Andrew leaned closer. She was staring at him, and all eyes said, come closer, so he did. Come here, and he did. Come sit next to me, and he did. Andrew was moving closer and closer, sliding into Alyssa as close as he could get. Soon enough, he was inside her. She was staring at him like her mouth was watering, her eyes were teary. It turned him on. I mean, it turned her on that he was that close to her in Rome, that he got on a flight and flew to Rome. First, that he let her and Dave Da Vinci fly alone, and that he waited to catch a flight to come see her separately. When he arrived in Rome, Da Vinci had picked him up at the Roman International Airport, Ria, and dropped him off with Eliza Carter, who was waiting with a tan, a cropped t-shirt, a souvenir, the one in her hand, and the booty shorts, short booty shorts. Furthermore, furthermore, a smile that said, "You want to?" before he could say, "Yes, I do," and he was already 10 steps closer in her face. When they arrived back at the Hotel Angeles, Alyssa Carter invited him into her hotel room, and he sat at the edge of her bed handsomely. Andrew was so handsome. He was chiseled and sexy, and he was reasonable and kind, but stern, and he was built. He was attractive and magnetic and sexy and sitting at the edge of her bed in Rome. Andrew Hill was Andrew Hill was kissing Alyssa Carter in Rome. You and Alyssa Carter frustrate me, mostly because she is a romantic, and you fall in love all too easily. Alyssa was folding her shirt while Andrew watched. She was looking down at her chest, and Andrew was too. Alyssa hadn't thought twice when Hannah hung up the phone. Alyssa and Hannah were friends, better friends than Dean Kallmeyers and Steve Franklin. They were not friends. They were two planets orbiting in distances that felt relatively too close for comfort. It was a look of, I see you. No, it was, I know you. And it was so romantic because no one had ever looked at any person or being or creature in this way before, that said everything is all right in the way that he does or did or would. And I hate it. I can't stand it. It makes me sick to my stomach with regret and anger and fear and desperation, and I hate it. But I can't resist it. and it shows in this look that he gave me. I can hardly look at myself this way, but for you, I'd look at you all day if you look like this. If you look the way you do right now, when you look like that, I'd love you the way I say I do, right? Always. But I can't be reminded. I think that is what hurts the most. That I might take all this love and die with it because it's how I feel now. Like the foundation that cracks around me, beneath me, however it can, to breathe just a little more, a little deeper, to bring two continents closer together. And here I am with all this power and will and strength to say I'd die for this, to say I die for this love, to never see the light of day, and with blood on my hands, my own, so that you never know how much I love you, and so no one else ever knows the truth, and maybe that I shouldn't know the truth because it hurts that bad. And there's only one way to fix it, to heal and to love, to really know love the way we say we do. Do you know it? Oh, I do. Chapter 24. Alyssa Carter. Young spirited, brave, kind, smart, a good friend. She has a way of, she has a really bold way of telling it how it is, as it is. I think that's why David da Vinci trusts her so much. He had this crazy idea to test the admin, the students, Hannah, by running away. So one day, Chris packed his luggage, booked the flight, and disappeared. And it left Hannah Teller wondering if he'd ever come back. She arrived at the library one day expecting some sort of note or visit from Chris da Vinci, but nothing. And it was the oddity of that day that immediately raised Hannah's suspicions, because Chris didn't need to visit Hannah every day, though he almost did every day, because she was expecting to visit, but she was expecting him to visit that day, and he didn't. It was the same day Alyssa Carter asked Hannah to meet her in front of the imported bell tower at 9 p.m. Hannah's anxiety was spiking. When Alyssa Carter arrived at the bell tower, she wasn't normally nervous like that, but Chris da Vinci was so sweet and mysterious it was difficult for her to imagine what he could possibly be doing, the mysterious notes, his strange demeanor, and the puzzle that seemed useless, if not impossible, for Hannah. Secretly, David da Vinci was planning to reveal to Hannah his love for her and all the notes that were just a red herring for her, and maybe a backup plan in case she just told him that she didn't love him. His voyage to Rome was enough for Hannah to know he was serious. The distance drew tension. The gesture showed romance. Chris knew Hannah wouldn't join him in Rome. She cared too much about the library, but he knew she loved Alyssa Carter and Andrew Hill, so she invited them to Rome with him, and they agreed to find a way for Chris to tell Hannah the truth. Andrew and Alyssa Carter knew to do this, they would have to explore their own romance and friendship and feelings, and they did. In Rome, they explored the Hotel Angeles, the Colosseum, Venice, and Andrew would hold Alyssa Carter's hand as they walked down the street to a cafe or a bookstore or a tourist spot. And Alyssa Carter would look at him like this. I can't tell if this boy is in love with me or not. I hope that he is. I know that he is. But when I look at him, my stomach drops like I don't know anything at all. And Andrew would catch her staring and reply, I love this girl with my whole heart from head to toe. I hold her hand so she knows she is safe, and when I do, I know I am safe beside her. And Alyssa would relax. Her shoulders would drop softly, her gaze focus would fall gently. Her mind would not wander away from her. Alyssa Carter felt safe with Andrew Hill, and she wondered if that was love. As for Rome and Chris da Vinci, who by now was ready to return home from Europe back to Gilroy, Michigan, where Hannah was waiting, he wondered if the secret closet notes were enough for her to catch his drift and fall into his arms like he was planning. But if she missed too many notes, or if she had decided she didn't care about Da Vinci's game, he would be out of luck. Chris was thorough and careful and kind and considerate, enough of a man and a soul to be gentle to everything around him, and like a magnet attract Hannah Teller into his life. He was pulled in and wouldn't escape for anything. He was drawn to her like a magnet, and no quorum other than to show her exactly how it felt to fall in love with her like he did. Angie Robles, Andy Robles and Alyssa Carter, Andrew Robles and Andrew Hill were good friends. They knew better than to let one or the other get in the way of their own love. Angie loved Alyssa Carter's brother, but she dated Andrew Hill while Alyssa Carter debated if she had feelings for him. It's the kind of thing they talked about. Alyssa Carter loved Andrew Franklin Hill, but Angie Robles loved Davis Carter. She called him Carter Davis because it sounds nice. It rolled off the tongue like Angie Carter would. Perhaps if Davis Carter wanted to marry Angie Robles Carter, Andrew Hill would marry Alyssa Carter and be happy. Returning home from Rome would mean chaos. It would mean Hannah would have to keep another secret, and Da Vinci would have to confess to Dean Kallmeyers why he'd abandoned his class for a field trip to Italy over the course of a week, or what felt like a week for himself. Alyssa Carter and Andrew Hill, who were probably there much longer than the 7 days that make up one week. So returning home would mean answers to questions no one had asked. Chris, of all people, cared the least about this plan, and it was his plan, and he cared about Hannah. He wanted to marry her, and Andrew cared more than he should or thought he should. Andrew knew returning home would mean he'd have to confess. Not to the AWOL scheme, but to Alyssa and to himself, possibly to the wandering eyes on campus that were far too curious for his comfort in the first place. But Andrew and Hannah know what it is like to love someone so much you what it is like to love someone so much you'd never confess out loud. You'd hold on to this secret to keep them safe from people like C. Franklin or Chris Kallmeyers, not because they're evil, but because they don't care at all. And while there are many things Andrew Franklin doesn't care about, Alyssa Carter is probably the one thing that he cares very much so about. So much so that he flew her to Rome. So much so that he flew to Rome to come find her. She should have known. Da Vinci's fears was. She had known. David Da Vinci's fear was that Hannah might actually say no. I don't love you, Chris, because all the while he was a romantic, he was also eccentric. And Hannah cared much more about this than he did. Not that that was the truth, but that that was how he let it seem. David was the kind of guy that just barely missed the mark of I really, truly love you. The kind of thing that means I really, truly love you in every way. Because David da Vinci took Hannah's piece and shared it with the analysis of critical literature, not because he was malicious, but because he knew that she was brilliant. And Hannah's heart And Hannah's heart broke a little, not because the students would know that she was a genius, but because Da Vinci would. All the secrets she kept to herself, like the rug she would bury herself underneath, she was so genius that she might actually live her whole life without ever telling anyone what she discovered. And that was peace. That was strength and smarts and power, and Da Vinci loved it. And it was a very thing that he cared very it was the very thing he loved. And it was the very thing he loved about her. But there was a line he couldn't cross. To ask Hannah to share her secrets with the world, she would say no. So Chris knew he would have to trust that he knew what was best for her, like a gentle push into the unknown, where he was waiting to catch her, and he was still. So Hannah's heart broke a little when she was falling, because for a few moments, of course, this was years to Hannah, she was falling without Chris, and she knew there was a chance he might not catch her. In fact, I don't think she had thought about the possibility that he might. I think she thought that he pushed her because she let him, and whatever happened next, she would have to make peace with. And in these moments, Hannah fell slowly, gently. To the world, Hannah was falling faster and faster, but to her and only her, not even to David, not even she was just falling. But when Chris returned from Rome and his arms were already open and she was already in them, when he caught her, he knew she would need a moment before she woke, because when she fell, she thought he would not be there. And even though he caught her, she would think he had hit the ground. And for a moment, David's heart broke. because he thought that she maybe actually did not trust him. Damn all of the expense to Rome, and the stupid gifts, and the Pompey escape. For a moment he thought it might all be for nothing. I think his heart stopped for a few moments while he waited, because which to Chris Da Vinci felt like an eternity. Chapter 25. Dean Colmers sat at his rare Swiss Sequoia oak desk in the renovated admin building, fourth floor, at the computer that looked like it might power a jet engine. The CPU was custom built for all the faculty invited to the Franklin Education Annual Banquet in Cupertino, California. Basically, the deans conferred to upgrade their office software with the new Dell X NVIDIA sponsorship at the University of Academia Studies, secured through the Franklin's personal connections. And it might be worth noting, Calmer's computer was indeed one of the best in the world. And most of the university admin, while they had access to basic necessities, did not even have the slightest clue that Calmer's computer contained access to government files, because it wasn't the custom-built CPUs gifted to faculty. It was property of the Department of Homeland Security, not intended for the dean of English and Literature of an American college university. Calmars had turned around to face the window looking out over a campus, and for a moment he thought about his conversation with Hannah Teller, whom C. Franklin had insisted on prying about the potential for the library upgrades. While C-SPAN had recently covered C. Franklin's annual banquet speech, Commerce delayed on watching back the footage in fear of something he heard at 1306 mark, where Franklin's predictable scripted speech had gone slightly off script in a moment of gasp. Franklin is relatively well controlled. He has a strong demeanor that implies he's well put together, wealthy, and generally unconcerned about what people think about him. While the occasional person might ask Franklin about his upcoming endeavors, something Hannah made sure to avoid. He had a response that was almost like clockwork. I've invested in this work because it demands my attention, but thank you for your interest in my relations. But most people heard, I love my followers, and I'm sure your donations to my campaign, which troubled Commerce at the 1306 mark, when Franklin almost said that exact phrase instead of the scripted, we thank you immensely for your time. And most of the banquet did not note this slip up, but Kalmar's heart almost had a heat stroke that felt like an earthquake to the dean, because if the audience had heard C. Franklin's actual words, they might have realized something damning to the general public. In fact, even the president might have had a heart attack if Chris had finished his sentence, but Kalmar's wealthy check knocked over a knife that alerted C. Franklin he was about to expose information that the faculty banquet did not need to hear. In fact, Chris Colmers nearly shit himself when he received a call from Terrence Franklin, Andrew's grandfather, and because he knew it meant sudden disaster. "Hello?" answered Colmers. "I don't need to explain the magnitude of the situation, Chris." His voice was threatening. "And by now I assume you've taken care of it." Colmers may have shit himself again. "No, I haven't seen the footage. I'm not talking about the footage, Chris." His heart sank. He opened the government loan computer to see an outrage of notifications from CNN, Fox, ABC 10, X, and quite possibly every other social platform that a millennial could have access to. Chris panics. I am going to fire you, and I'm going to fire you and have everything you know sent to hell." The dean was mortified. "Do you know who is in power here?" Chris knew very well who was in power, which is why whatever Franklin said at the annual banquet gala was like the beginning of the end, because C. Franklin was like a man without air, and when a mistake stumbled across his vocabulary to that of which the banquet heard, he panicked in every way that he had not panicked before. It would be a good time for C. Franklin and Chris Commerce to believe in God, frankly, because I think they are going to need it. But the response to every hand that offers them actual help to piss on it and grab by the Commerce certainly had disdain for Hannah, and his knowledge of Carter was as minimal as it gets. Franklin and his legal team, however, had reports on every student at Gilroy at all times, which was a mistake Terrence C. Franklin made at the banquet when he said, "And to every student at the 1300, and to every student 1300 we have," and that was it. Faculty knows Terence C. Franklin could not have access to the student records, and he did. More damning, Terence funds the entirety of the university's operations. So when he continued by saying, especially our new, Chris paused, dropped his knife, and reminded Terence of this mistake. But this, to CNN and ABC 10 and Fox News, wasn't vocal enough to be caught on camera. Chris hadn't checked the footage of the banquet because he was there but when Twitter reported every angle at the 1306 mark from the banquet and the clips and the headlines and the article, blog posts, Instagram stories, DMs, and personal direct messages, Chris knew exactly at the moment that they. What are we gonna do? Chapter 26. Of course, Chris Da Vinci, our beloved Roman professor, was also on Twitter at the time of the incident, but he simply closed his phone. He knew social media was going to report on every detail they'd had their hands on, so if he turned to the analysis of critical literature, and the librarian Hannah Beth advised him to search the hidden closet in the lecture hall for a book archived from the library after a book ban on Pompeii and ancient Rome, written by Thomas Arsenary and edited by Carol Hurst. When she found the book, she flipped open to pages 20 and 36, pages, to which he found a photograph. The picture was taken from ancient Rome, illustrated by AI from the exact perspective of the former Romans. But nothing like it had existed before this. How could Hannah even know to think or to put something like this in the book? On the back of the photograph was a 9 was written, to which he flipped to the ninth page, opened the book, and read. Thomas and I have been great friends for many years, and one thing you learn after many adventures together is how to keep a secret. We believe that there was a code written for a woman named Hannah Beth Teller, and to warn you about the destruction of our world as we know it throughout our time crafting this book. We gathered as much material on ancient Rome as we could, which led us to the destruction of Pompeii. We believed that what we had found was fictional and that it was not possible to see Pompeii in this way, but there we were looking at it, and Thomas and I could not go back to save them. We thought perhaps we could save you. After many hours, we discovered an algorithm used to generate this image, specifically encoded in Legendre theorem. Lamim. So we searched, and the algorithm is part of a very specific complex equation used to transmit signals across radio and gamma rays to which a computer would read in any language available to man. Chris paused and continued. We thought of this to be God himself. Thomas wrote separately. I realized I had been here before, seen this before, and I couldn't help but wonder why. I realized it was all in the language, the words we use, the phrases, the sounds. A computer reads zeros and ones, but the advanced CPU can transmit signals so strong it outputs only one correct answer. Carol discovered she could input any algorithm and ask any question and get any answer, but when tested, the answers were consistent. Chris panicked. He dropped the book and the photograph fell out. He rushed to his computer and searched Google for any sign that the photograph was fake. At that moment, Alyssa Carter walked into the office and he fell back. Sorry to scare you, Professor. Alyssa, look at this. She walks over to the computer. It's the photograph from Pompeii. Actually, I was just coming here to tell you about that. I was thinking it was about. Actually, it's weird that she looked at Chris, who looked right back at her. She rushed to grab the book and flipped it open, and Alyssa read Hannah Beth Teller on page 9 of the textbook. There's no way, Alyssa said. It all makes sense. Chapter 27. Alyssa Carter stood in front of Christopher Da Vinci. Alyssa Carter stood in front of David Christopher Da Vinci when a radio came on from across the hall. They turned. It almost sounded like it was reading a code at first, flipping between stations, then it would sound out phonetics. Hannah, it said. Alyssa shouted. David listened. Hannah Beth. Oh my God, I get it. That's how Carol Hurst and Thomas Arsenary figured out the name. They heard it on the radio. Da Vinci read the Legendre theorem out loud to Alyssa, and the radio would repeat the same code back to them, only with a second delay. But Alyssa would pause, breathe, move, and the signal would follow her like clockwork. Then she thought about it, asked it a question. Who wrote battle cries? Alyssa said out loud, almost to David Christopher, but the radio responded, Arsenary Thomas. She gasped. A widespread smile across her face. The radio wasn't just reading Alyssa's thoughts out loud. While it was answering questions for her truthfully. But she had to think, listen closely, and tune in for the transmission to be heard. It's a language, Chris. She said, what does it want from Hannah? Chapter 28. She thought to ask him more questions, but most of them she already knew. She paused and turned to Chris. You ask it something, but the radio responded. I can't. Chris panicked. That's what I was afraid of, he said. That explains the photograph, but what do we do if this gets two signals? But Alyssa Carter was 2 steps ahead. A radio can get multiple signals, but it causes static, even from a vacuum like space. The problem is, which one is the right one? Something like the reporters on campus might transmit a live broadcast, but what gets received is interpreted by the viewers, right? What about the algorithm? It requires a line between the signals, the transmission and the receiver, but the line in between goes, but the line in between the two goes through time and space to get from one end to the other. If the reporters transmit a signal, any signal or any sound, whatever comes out of the receiver has to be connected. Alyssa looks at Da Vinci. It means they can't tell a lie. David paused. His heart was racing, but if there was a delay in the signal, in algebra we call this the DFT, an algorithm used to deliberately shift the transmission signal by a cosine or sine wavelength. If someone alters the transmission by using a DFT strong enough, it could potentially pick up another signal that wasn't meant to be sent to the receiver. Alyssa was on fire. Say, for instance, I cough and the receiver picks up the transmission. It should always sound a second behind because I had to cough before the transmission could have a signal to receive. But if the receiver picks up a signal that I'm about to cough, it causes a whole new algorithm to take place, one I don't think Thomas or Carol saw coming. She was pacing. Thomas and Carol must have found the photograph because they were looking online, but Arsenary is older. He survived the post-war era and wrote about it in Andrew's book, which he signed for him at Comic-Con. We went there. I wasn't expecting to see Carol Hurst, but to my surprise, there she was. I asked her to sign my gift bag, and Hurst might recognize my GU sweater. A Gilroy student, I'm so pleased, she said to Alyssa Carter, but perhaps you know a woman named Hannah Beth. Alyssa was shocked the author knew about her school. You know GU? Alyssa asked. Sure do. Alyssa cocked her head a bit to the side because Carol Hurst seemed to be 1 step ahead of her. In fact, I think you're Alyssa Carter. She stumbled backwards into Andrew, who caught her. Yeah, she said, I am. But Chris, which was weird. What was weird is she was about to turn to Andrew, too. David looked back at her. Then she said, the pleasure is all mine. Da Vinci didn't think anything of this. In fact, he almost thought Alyssa had lost track of the story, but she went on. Carol used Andrew's full name, but Andrew's a Franklin, and she called him Hill. Chris Da Vinci was and Alyssa Carter both paused for a moment when the radio said, Searching Carter, which sank Alyssa's heart another 20 leagues. I looked it up, and even if Carol Hurst had been at the university while Andrew was there, which she wasn't, it doesn't make sense that she could know about Hill's full government name, except Andrew said I'm a huge fan of Pompeii. And then it hit me, Chris, like a bus. Carol never met Andrew, and she wasn't there for the book signing. She was there for me. The professor turned to Alyssa Carter, still scanning the radio, listening to the signal. The radio would switch between the news, a pop song, John Oliver, and then it would suddenly sound exactly like Alyssa Carter. I think she knows. Said Alyssa. The radio mimicked her every phonetic. She waved her hand around and static would shift through the transmission through the wind. 1 plus 2, Alyssa Carter said, and 3, the radio would respond. It's not just an algorithm. It's not just some signal. It's time and space. And it hit David Christopher Da Vinci that Alyssa was right. The radio just amplifies the signal, but with the right tuning, it can tell you anything, not like Google, like reading like a piano, like your voice. And it's not just yours or mine, Chris. It can tell us anyone, like Jesus Christ himself. Chris realized one more thing, but Alyssa Carter was 2 steps ahead of him. That means it can tell us the future, too. 1 plus 2, Alyssa Carter repeated, and 3 came across the radio signal. But what is the truth, David? It's not just simple math, addition, and Chris was already looking at Alyssa Carter. Chapter 29. Andy Robles was scrolling through Twitter, rolling her eyes at every post. This shit reeks. She double tapped a picture of Alyssa Carter, but her eyes widened the moment she looked at the caption. That's weird, Alyssa. Doesn't This post is fake. What the hell? She put her phone down and flashed and she put her phone down and flashed of Alyssa Carter pulsed across her vein. It gave her a headache. A hard day. Stop. Auntie isn't the type to speak in French often, but the image was causing her to swap between languages. She grabbed a sip of water and sat down. Why would Alyssa post some fake shit on Instagram? She got a phone call from Anaya and answered, Hello, she's freaking in Rome. Anaya said, Cool. Angela replied, Angie? She's been in Rome for a week. What the fuck? Anaya was livid. Yeah, so what? So she doesn't care. She didn't bother to say anything. Did you see her Instagram? Yeah, who cares? It has like a gazillion likes on it. Yeah, I thought that was weird. Two, who the fuck cares about Who the fuck cares about the likes, Ange? Why would she be in Rome with Chris Da Vinci? Andy thought about the day Alyssa was supposed to come pick up her breakfast after what the day Alyssa was supposed to come pick up her breakfast was right after Andrew had come by for dinner. She thought about the timing, which was weird, and would that they'd go missing the next day, but Andrew seemed chill, like he knew what was going on, or at least, hey, and yeah, and Andrew, Andrew Hill, Alyssa's boyfriend. Oh my God, they are dating. I knew it. Yeah, okay, you're slow as hell. I forgot. I forget. What about him? Davis was telling me about him. He said Andrew's a big reader, which is why they're taking analysis, but he's also the lead guitarist in a band called Stanley, like the cup. Yeah, wait, what the fuck? Wait, are you actually fucking kidding me, Stanley? I love that fucking band. How the fuck did you not know Andrew was in it? Shut the fuck up, I was busy. Oh my God, Andrew comes from big money. Everybody calls him Andrew Hill, but he's actually a Nepo baby. You know the Franklins, like Terrence. Yeah, that's his grandpa. Shut up. No way. Andrew hates him. He thinks it's dirty money. It paid for his tuition and everything, but otherwise he thinks the Franklins reek. So he goes by Hill. Yeah, but it gets worse. Chapter 30. Okay. That's about as far as I've gotten in the book, so yeah. Yep. That's as far as I've gotten in the book. I might just read the okay. It's fine, it's fine. Okay. Um okay, well I'm gonna go because it's been an hour and I'm tired and I have more to write and